Welcome to the Fun Astrology video podcast. A little abbreviated this week, but there is so much going on in the news right now and in the chart that I thought we would put them together and talk about two big events coming up this weekend: Mars turning retrograde and Neptune turning direct from retrograde. And before we look at the chart, let's look at just today's headlines. This is all for Wednesday, December 4th. From the Daily News, United Healthcare CEO Brian Thompson killed by a masked gunman outside Midtown Hilton Hotel. From the Washington Post, same day, no confidence vote topples French government, plunges country into chaos. And a parlay from that from the Telegraph, Europe is again on the brink of financial Armageddon. This time it may not step back. From the New York Times, South Korean leader will face impeachment vote over martial law declaration. And from the early morning hours overnight, millions of people in Cuba without power after grid collapse. And really, there couldn't be a more parallel description of what's going on this chart as reflected on Friday, December 6th at 6:33 in the evening, 6:34. And I put this to New York Time because Mars, the planet of war and aggression and assassinations, stations to turn retrograde on Friday. Whenever a planet in astrology stations to go retrograde, what that means is that it's slowing down in its appearance in the sky. We're not going to explain that here. There are a lot of videos on YouTube if you'd like to look into those on what comprises a retrograde, and a picture is worth 1,000 words. I'll refer you to some of those. A simple search would do it. But basically, a planet's strength in astrology, in astrological terms, gets magnified, it gets stronger at two different times in its planetary life. One is when it starts to slow down in order to go backwards, and conversely, when it slows down to turn around and start going forward again after the retrograde period, which in this case will be in early February for Mars. The other time is when a planet basically changes signs. So if we see, when Mars continues on, for example, and eventually turns direct and finds its way into Virgo, well, right there at that cusp point is when another opportunity for a planet to be operating at its strongest. And this retrograde is especially important because just 24 hours and 10 minutes later, literally, Neptune, just about the polar opposite characteristics of Mars, notice it's in retrograde, will start moving forward again, eventually making its way toward Aries in early 2025, the sign ruled by Mars, covering war and aggression, etc., etc. So just as Mars will move back into Cancer, and just as it starts to come back out of retrograde, Neptune will be entering its home turf in Aries. So this is incredible Mars-related energy that is going to be amplified over the next about 90 days. And this is of particular interest to me personally because I have Mars in my own natal chart in a 3-planet, what's called a stellium. That's 3 or more planets in a sign. And my Mars, Neptune, and Sun are all at the same degree in Scorpio, which happens to be 6. So yes, you are watching what? The devil, the Antichrist. 666 in Scorpio. I've lived with it all my life. Scary. Well, no, seriously. Well, the reason why is because at 6 degrees Leo would put that about right here. That's a square. And also Pluto is right here at the beginning of Aquarius. So that's about right here in the sky. There's Pluto, that's also a square. So I have what's known as a T-square in astrology between this exact aspect of what is going on right now. So I am especially tuned into this and very vested in what all is going to happen. So this is the structure of the chart on Friday night. Mars turns retrograde, and the next day, like say 24 hours later, Neptune turns direct. So you have this energy of this war type paradigm, which you would think is slowing down, but remember, it's standing still basically this entire week and weekend, that Mars is just cooking. So every characteristic of Mars, positive and negative, is exhibiting it itself right now. You may be feeling a strong urge to get some project going or some urgency related to something. That's Mars. You may feel aggressive toward somebody, or somebody may be feeling aggressive toward you. That's Mars. You have these governmental collapses, not just challenges, not just some minor kind of event of normal everyday news. Go back and look at the headline. The French government collapses. We're talking about a country that declared martial law on its citizens for no other reason that I can see but paranoia. That's Mars playing itself out on a national level. You talk about what could happen. Now, remember, this energy is affecting all 8 billion of us on the planet. It's not just a United States thing or a European thing. This is everybody. Everywhere is feeling this. So it's showing up in South Korea. What it does is it triggers these already sensitive areas. It's not like it just all of a sudden picks a country and shows up there. This was brewing, and this was kind of like the snap that triggered it off. Same thing in France. That's been brewing for a long time. It was no big surprise that this happened. It's been in the works. The financial situation. Every country right now in the world is basically in some kind of a debt crisis. And it's all just like a matchstick. And when we saw Mars going retrograde, in Ray Merriman's MMA Cycles 2025 forecast book, which I got to narrate to an audiobook, he begins with this. He talks about the dates that it's going to happen. And he says, with Mars retrograde, you might wonder what could possibly go wrong. And he goes into, I'm going to pull several things from here because in the forecast book, it is brilliant, and it will be available on audio, and it should be out here pretty soon. And when it is, it will be announced on the podcasts. And then we'll have Ray in for an interview to talk about next year. But I mean, to start this by saying what could possibly go wrong, and then look at today's headlines. And obviously, the one that just tugs at my heart, because here's a 50-year-old man who had a beautiful wife and 2 precious teenage boys. And however you feel about United Healthcare as a company or commercial insurance as a business, this man had a wife and a family, and he was a son and probably a brother and probably a nephew, and and just the tragedy of not being able to walk out of your vehicle, limousine, whatever, into a business meeting without somebody coming up on a bicycle, ambushing you and shooting you in the chest is absolutely unbelievable. But that too is Mars energy. So I thought it might be good for us to stop here for just a minute to take a look at some of the characteristics of Mars going retrograde and what we can anticipate and what we can do about it. So this first area that I'd like to just make us aware of is that throughout this entire retrograde period, we could be experiencing amplified conflict, aggression, even war. Now, we've seen some of that certainly play out in these different things that have happened just this week, but just be on the alert that there are so many tinderboxes out there right now, including in our own country, that things could pop under this energy. The collective doesn't know how to handle this. I mean, for you and I, as you're going to see in the 4th point that I'd like to bring here, that it does demand a lot of self-care. It demands a lot of self-restraint and resistance to this kind of thing. So if you feel yourself moving into anything related to this kind of characteristic, aggression, conflict, etc., throw on your own brakes, slam on your own brakes, and pull it back as far as you can. And just say, wait a minute, this is not a time to move forward. Here's one of the challenges that we have. Our society and world culture is so go, go, go now that the demands on us are so huge from all sources, from our family, from our employers, from just the vibe of where we live, etc., is just this amped up pace that we don't slow down. And, ancient folk, like ancient astrologers, knew several things that would help a human being that we don't do today. One of them is fasting. You know that fasting can help reset our metabolism, and yet we don't do it. It's not built into our culture. But another are these natural rhythms of retrogrades. And Mars only goes retrograde about every 24 to 26 months. It lasts for a good little chunk, but it is only an every 2-year phenomenon. Mercury, 3 or 4 times a year, depending on where they fall on the calendar. Mercury retrogrades are a time for us to take a little pause. If we could, and I wish I could more, break from the screens. That's something that we should be building in order to remain healthy. And Mars retrograde is a time to set our ambitious plans aside for that pause in order to regroup and focus on a lot of things, including our whys. Why are we doing this? Who do I need to have involved in this? Things like that. Structural things, infrastructural things. That's the stuff of Mars retrogrades. So if you feel yourself in this conflict, in a conflicting kind of energy, pull it back and realize that that's something that you need to work through and hold the brakes on as much as you absolutely positively can. Number 2, and I'm sorry I don't write very good with these Wacom pens, but it's the best we can do. At least it gets the point across. To focus on the fact that there could be some collective, mundane, government-level kinds of unrest periods, like we've seen in at least 2 places already, France and South Korea. Just keep in mind, that is possible. Number 3 here to point out is to slow down your advances, just like we talked about. When you think about the push-it, pedal-to-the-metal kind of mode, that's Mars in a good way, and you're probably feeling it right now because Mars is so much stronger. But overall, this is a really good time to just be in your space, be present, don't be pushing. Probably that would be the biggest practical thing, is just try not to be pushing during these next couple of months. And then lastly, and somebody might say, Thomas, why are you yelling? Tons, in all caps, tons of self-care. Yes, I am saying that if ever there was one of these retrograde periods, or we talk about the moon wobble, or we talk about all these things on the Fun Astrology podcast, if any of them pointed you to self-care, a self-care consciousness through the 3rd week of February, to just stay in that always present, constant self-care mode. Take a dry marker and write it on your bathroom mirror, or put it on a Post-it note, a sticky note, and stick it on there. Something to remind you, self-care. Do something to take care of yourself during this period. Those are probably the 4 biggest things that we can do to make sure that we're in our highest state of being, our highest timeline during this period. Now let's talk about Neptune, because Neptune, like I said, on Saturday, 24 hours later, turns direct, and once it gets its speed up and it moves the second slowest next to Pluto, it takes 165 years to go around the sun, but it is going to start moving out of Pisces. Now it will first enter there on March 31st of 2025, and then, because of the retrograde dance, it will come back into Pisces. And then finally, here's what's going to happen. Saturn will catch up with it. So they'll be together. And then they move into 0 degrees Aries. Now, this is a really big deal, and I mentioned this Ray Merriman Forecast 2025 book. He has a database going back approximately 6,000 years of astrological data. And he said that as far as they've been able to search and find, they don't have a record of as many changes of these outer planets that we've talked about on here and on the podcast, that we have Uranus changing signs, Jupiter changing signs, Saturn and Neptune changing signs, Pluto has already changed signs. Those 5 are the big, what they call outer theme-building planets. They're the ones that set the tone. These other planets are the ones that trigger stuff along the way. So not in recorded history that at least one of the prominent cycle theorists of using astrology to reflect human cycles, Ray Merriman, has been able to find that we don't have a correlation to this ever. So he calls this the Aries vortex. Saturn and Neptune in 2026 finally together, and in February of that year they conjoin at near 0 degrees Aries. This is a big-time phenomenon, and it is going to completely change the energy on our planet. Neptune is typically considered a quote-unquote negative planet for the dark shadow sides that it exhibits. It's all about lies and deceptions and painting a picture of illusion or a foggy picture of lack of clarity, deception, lies, etc. And also it rules things related to addictions of any type. So when you put all of that package together, it is a rather gnarly, not happy, not pretty kind of package. The other side of it, though, is quite an offset that I guess the ancient astrologers didn't, well, it wasn't that ancient because it was only discovered in the 1700s, but basically something that should be so negative is offset by something that is incredibly huge. Because Neptune, being in mythology the Lord of the Deep, represents our deepest soul emotions, our deepest soul's depths. And it actually represents our reconnection with God. Liz Green wrote an incredible book on Neptune by the name Neptune, and she explores the theme of redemption in that book, coming back to our source. In other words, maybe we were there. When we come here, we separate from, and part of the dropping us down here on earth from a soul journey perspective is to find our way back to that source. So that's the theme of Neptune. And Neptune will be, again, gaining strength in the latter degrees of Pisces. Now, what have we been seeing since Neptune has been in Pisces since 2012? A lot of these kinds of things where masks have been coming off. We've been through all kinds of movements where what used to be lies and deceptions controlling the masses in various areas are exposed. And I'm thinking that we'll see a lot more of that now in these later degrees as Neptune closes out this transit through Pisces for the next 165 years. And that takes us back to when it was in Aries before. And that takes us back to the last time that Neptune was in Aries, and the last time that it moved in and stayed was 1862. And you know what happened in the 1860s in the United States, the Civil War. And there's something else that we're watching here that's going to be interesting, and it shows up in this chart all the way back to 1862. This is Uranus, and it is here in Gemini. Right now, in the sky, Uranus is in Taurus, but it's getting ready next year to move into Gemini. And if we go back to both the Revolutionary War, the Civil War, and World War II, Uranus was in Gemini during all 3 of those conflicts. Now, is history going to exactly repeat itself? Never would say that. But we do learn when we go back and look at history that we can often at least spot potential trends. And I think that's what we're talking about here. So there is so much going on right now in the sky. And when you take a look at the news headlines that were there today, I just thought, well, let's just take a look at this together, get a game plan going so that at least we know what's going on around us, and then we won't be so anxious and nervous, hopefully. And we have a personal game plan of how we're going to manage this as well. The one thing, if I could leave you with just one thing, it would be personal self-care. That's the key to me. I'll be with you all the way on the audio podcasts. We'll probably be doing more videos. Check out our TikTok channel as well. YouTube Shorts coming off of this. I'm going to throw up the green screen, and we're going to do more to keep us all involved on all aspects of what's going on in the sky, as above, so below. Thanks so much for watching.